Greg and I are going to talk to you about a topic that we're very passionate on. It's around networks. If you think about networks, networks exist way beyond, out in society, networks exist not just for people, not just for machines, not just for animals. They exist in nature as a whole. The power of networks themselves are incredibly valuable. The problem is, how do you actually harness that? And how do you use it in a way, how do you use the power in a way that's extremely valuable for an organization? There's a fascinating article I read in Forbes recently, and it talked about graphs. And everyone's familiar with graphs. There's a number of different graphs out there. So if you look at the personal graph, Facebook owns that personal graph. Amazon really has got that retail graph going. Look at LinkedIn, everyone here uses LinkedIn. It really has the professional graph. What TrustSphere is doing is we're working on what we call the enterprise relationship graph. We have a fundamental thesis that an organization's collective relationship network is extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful, and it's a collective asset. And if it's used in a way that's ethical, that's used in a way that's actionable, it becomes incredibly powerful for the organization and the individuals within the organization. Another great report, if you haven't had a chance to see this, this is one of my favorites. Accenture put a report out which said there's around $3 trillion of trapped data or trapped value that sits within organizations. And this is through new sources of data. This group here, in terms of the people analytics group, you have the ability, and you're sitting on a lot of that data. 77% of leaders said that they want to use this this data to actually transform the way they operate. So they actually want to do it. So this is business leaders. In the survey, they said 77% of them said that they would want to use this data to improve their own business performance. And interestingly enough, and everyone talks about networks as sometimes a little bit creepy, 92% of employees surveyed, there was 14,000 employees surveyed as part of this, said that they would use this data, they would see value in this data being used as long as it was used to improve their own processes or improve the way that they operated. We firmly believe that this data is extremely powerful, and there's one part of it that's never measured. There's a lot of discussion that went on through the conference around hard skills and soft skills, and the whole notion of IQ and EQ. We think there's a third portion to this, which is your RQ. It's your relationship quotient. It's how well you're connected into the network. And that connectivity allows you then to be able to both be in the path of new information, but also disseminate information. There's been a lot of talk around how do you use this data in a way, how do you use data and how do you use analytics to transform the way businesses operate? What we've done is we've taken an approach where we're looking specifically at how is this being used to improve leadership and talent, diversity and inclusion, and network of teams. How do you start to understand where the teams are collaborating? How do you start to understand who the key influences are in an organization? If you've got a merger going on, are the teams actually integrating or not? From a D&I perspective, everyone talks about diversity and it's easy to measure. How do you measure levels of inclusion? Inclusiveness is something that networks start to give you an idea as to whether an initiative that you have has moved forward or not, or is having the desired effect. And with leadership and talent, identifying high potentials, identifying and giving individual leaders the ability to understand their own networks and nudge their behaviors is a very, very powerful use of O&A. What I'd like to do is hand over to Greg, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the case studies that we have in this space.
Thank you, my friend. Hey, g'day folks, I'm Greg Newman from New Zealand. That's it, that's all I got. I'm the unofficial chief storyteller. I lead the storytelling team at TrustSphere, which is currently just me. It's a powerful team, it's an unofficial team. So I tell the stories about the super cool stuff our customers are doing once they start to unleash the network data in their organizations. So I'm gonna show you some examples of how our customers are using this massive set of real-time data, this massive continually growing human network in their organization. To illustrate how big this is, we've just finished a project with a customer close by here. They had about 25,000 employees. In our first little project, we took 100 days worth of data. and that was 171 million messages that we consumed. So we mapped the network with 680,000 points on it, internal and external, in real time. So what do you do with that? That's a lot of data, but how do you make business impact? Simple things. Start with the easy to consume stuff. Every time you do a business transformation, every time you try and drive new system adoption, companies traditionally struggle to find who are the people in the branch offices and the departments and the regional centres who can carry on this message, who can cascade this message through their team and department. With this customer, a 6,000 person headquarters, they would traditionally use 800 managers to cascade this information. So we looked at how influential they were. They had about an 80% touch on the network. We were able to find just 300 people who were hidden in the network who were more influential. So now instead of training 800 people and educating 800 people, they're just using those 300 to cascade the messages. At a more strategic level, companies are always trying to find those high pos. Who are the high potential people? Again, buried deep in the organisation. What we know is high potential employees work very differently to average regular employees. We see they build about 40% more relationships. And remember, what we're measuring is working relationships. We're not looking at who you go for coffee with or who you catch the bus to work with. We're looking at digital transactions in the workplace, email, instant message and telephone, and we're looking at the pattern of those, the speed of those, the ferocity of those, to understand who you do your job with, who makes you awesome and who do you make awesome. So this is a great starting point for building a hypo pool. We're not saying you throw away the rest of your process, but how about supply a manager with those 3 or 4 people in their team who build this type of social capital and start the conversation without a blank sheet of paper, without a whole lot of biases. Let's start with some real data-driven insight. Another big obvious application of understanding relationships is understanding salespeople. So again, just finished a super cool piece of work looking at what are the networks that top performing salespeople build. And you won't be surprised to know that top performing salespeople build really large external networks. But what's also crucial is having a really strong internal network. When your customer raises a concern, when they raise a query, when they want to change the pricing, when they want to change the product, those salespeople need to know and have trusting relationships with people who can fix that, turn it around quickly and let the deal close. That internal collaboration, that's what we're really illustrating there. And this doesn't always have to be at an individual level, right? We can roll this up and look at teams, look at the impact of turnover on teams, look at the impact of business change on teams. One of the things that gets us most excited though is measuring organisational inclusiveness. So it's okay, we set a diversity target, we're going to hire different people, but in the networks we each build at work, how inclusive are they? How many new starters do we work with? How many return to work mothers do we work with? How many minority groups do we work with? And as we go up through the hierarchy of the organisation, how does that change? We did a piece of work with a large Wall Street firm. We discovered that if you've been there 10 years or more, you don't work with anyone with less than 5 years tenure. That is a group of really smart people working with other really smart people who all think the same. They view the world the same, they view everything the same, so the chance of them doing anything innovative or amazing is really low. So what that customer's doing is building project teams of people who would never encounter each other at work so that they get that exposure to the diversity. My favourite one though is about promotability. So how do we move more people up through the corporate hierarchy to bring that diversity right to the top of our organisation? We did a really amazing study. This one is some work from Boris Groysberg. He's my hero, as well as my Adam Grant tattoo and my Michael Arena tattoo. I've also got a Boris Groysberg on my back. And I'm not going to tell you where my owl tattoo is, though. This is some work Boris does about when people move from company to company, what network supports them and what network guarantees their success. And it turned out female employees have much broader networks outside the company they work in. So when they move to a new organisation, they keep that network, they keep that relationship, they keep all of that trust. Male employees in the financial services on Wall Street keep a really strong internal network, which makes them awesome in the company they work in right now. But if that cohort doesn't move with them, suddenly they're isolated and they're on their own and they don't perform as well. The other really cool thing we discovered is that in one customer, if you want to get a female promoted, she needs at least 2 strong working relationships with the highest level of the organisational hierarchy. So that's not mentoring, that's not going for coffee, that is doing work together. And the way they interpreted that is when those promotion discussions go on, that executive knows the results. The performance is a given, but they know the results and the way that lady works, and they are willing to vouch for her. If they've never worked with her, they won't vouch for her. The interesting thing is those relationships were not critical to males getting promoted. For a male to get promoted, it was important to have a broad-based network across the hierarchy of the organisation. I want to caveat that, that's one firm, that's one experience. I can't say it applies to everyone, right? So these are the types of insights we gather. This is the type of cool stuff we do. We're always looking for really smart people who want to do cool stuff. Some of the things we're exploring this year is digitizing culture and digitizing engagement. Right? What is your culture? It's not stuff stuck on the wall in the boardroom. It's how teams of individuals work together in an office, in a department, in a location. What's the culture they have? How do they work together? How do they collaborate? And we're sure that it varies massively across an organisation. Similarly, engagement. Engagement isn't just how I feel and how I perceive work, it's also how engaged I am with everyone I work with. So what if that rapidly changes? What if my team disappears around me? What if I lose all of my working relationships? We know that that makes you much more likely to turn over, to leave the organisation. That's all the stories for today. One more thing, if this stuff excites you, if you want to see your own network for the first time, if you want to see who you work with most in your organisation and where your relationships are strongest, and you run Office 365 in your corporate environment, you can download this app. Just check on the App Store, TrustSphere Mobile PE, Personal Edition. What it does is it takes your Office 365 credentials, it extracts some data from your phone and from the server. We don't store it, we don't access it, we don't look at it, but it will show you in the last 90 days of activity who are your strongest relationships, who do you work with the most, and crucially, who are you losing relationships with? Who are your new connections? Who's new in your network?
Okay, gentlemen, thank you.
That's it.